Liss, and the name of the program is The Way to Go. I invite you to join me each week at this time as we explore places to go and things to do. Today, we're paying a visit to a place that is old and new at the same time. It's the Jewish Museum on Fifth Avenue, New York, which has recently reopened after being closed for some time. Some great changes that have taken place. My guest today is Judith Siegel, who is the Director of Education for the Jewish Museum. And welcome to The Way to Go.
Thank you.
Now that the museum has reopened, what's the big change?
The big change in a word is space, I think, and also the luxury of being able to have so much more of our collection out on view to the public, and that we're able to serve the public better. The museum looks gorgeous, and the amenities that we offer to the public, everything from this sense of a more integrated building to a cafe down in the lower level.
When you talk about space, what's a comparison between what the space is now and what it was before?
We're twice as large as we were before we did the renovation. We have doubled the gallery space. The permanent exhibition alone now has 11,000 square feet, and we have a total of about 22,000 square feet of exhibition space.
But when I visited the museum the other day, I couldn't tell where the new section began and the old section ended, although I did see some parts where there was some very, very good dark wood. I assume that was in the old portion then.
Well, part of it, you really can't tell. The architects have done such a masterful job of integrating the spaces and recreating and reproducing some of the most complicated interior architectural detailing. It's very hard to tell, but it's the most frequently asked question. Am I in the old building or the new building? So,
and there were some things done in the auditorium where some of the things from the old building were used in the new. Let's talk about that a little bit.
The auditorium has in it, it's the same space that was occupied by the old auditorium, but it has been, I think the word we use is Warburgized. It's become part of the mansion in its architectural detailing, but the architect also took some of the architectural detailing that was in a staircase that had to be removed and installed those beautiful stained glass window elements into the auditorium. So it's just become part of the total effect.
The chandelier and the screen are just magnificent to see. But you used an interesting term there, and Warburgized, but that doesn't mean anything unless people know the Warburg relationship. So let's talk about Warburg.
The mansion was the home of Felix and Frieda Schiff Warburg. Her father was Jacob Schiff, and they were a very prominent banking family in New York around the turn of the 20th century. And the mansion was built on the occasion of their marriage. They raised 5 children in that mansion, the youngest of whom died just very recently. And he was able actually to do some oral history for us, so we know a lot about how the family lived in the house. And they kept the house, Frieda Warburg kept the house till the late 40s. Her husband had died, her children had grown. She was on the board of the Jewish Theological Seminary, where the original Jewish Museum began.
When did it begin, actually?
In 1904, with a gift of 26 objects from a man named Judge Mayer Salzberger, with the idea that this was the beginning of a collection that would serve to help educate not only Jews but non-Jews about Jewish history and Jewish culture. We soon outgrew spaces in the library of the seminary, and when Frieda Schiff Warburg was ready to give up her mansion, she understood that we needed the space, and she gave it to us to be used as the Jewish Museum. It opened there in 1947.
And then it was expanded after that, wasn't it?
In 1963, there was an addition put onto the building to give us more space, because while it's quite a gorgeous mansion, it clearly wasn't large enough to contain exhibitions and the collections and the staff, so it was expanded then.
And that was a more modern-looking addition at that time. And now, when work started in 1989, was
Right.
it on the new expansion? It was decided to give it more of the old character.
It was decided really to allow the mansion to be, or the larger space to be more integrated, so that just as everybody is confused when they go in, they can't tell the old from the new, it's a whole. And I think the architect, Kevin Roche of Kevin Roche, John Dinkeloo Associates, who's quite a famous architect in America, an award-winning architect, it's really a tribute to his greatness that he didn't put on a specific mark of his individual style, but that he really saw the building as this integral whole and just expanded it so it all looked of a piece.
So what specifically was done? Let's talk about the exterior for the moment. The mansion itself stands on the corner of Fifth Avenue and
92nd
Street.
Right, and that facade remains the same. What's really changed is the Fifth Avenue side. In place of the sculpture court and the facade of the Liss building, which was the 1963 edition, the mansion has been expanded, so it just looks like it got larger, and it's really very difficult. There's a small indentation on Fifth Avenue because I'm told there had to be some differentiation. I don't know why, but it just looks as if the whole thing expanded.
And then the museum also took over a brownstone on the 92nd Street side.
Yes, it was a fortunate turn of luck that the brownstone next door, which had been used as a nursery school, it was the day school, they were looking for larger quarters, and we felt this is a wonderful opportunity to have more space, and so we acquired that also, and it now houses administrative offices and a design shop, which is some of the most beautiful Judaica that's currently being created.
But the museum was very fortunate in able to get the limestone from the exact same source.
That's right.
And certainly that allowed for that continuity to go into both directions.
That's right. Gives us a good sense of history, too, to have kept it all together like that.
Let's get back to basics. What is the purpose of the Jewish Museum?
The Jewish Museum is an institution whose collections exhibit and educate about the Jewish experience, historically, culturally, and in terms of religious the religious history of the Jews. And it's meant to be a museum not only for Jews, but for non-Jews. It really does fulfill the purpose of the original thinkers about the museum, that we use our collections to help people understand what the Jewish experience is all about, what Jewish history is, what Jewish culture is.
But it's more than that, because it has had a long history of being a leader in presenting art, American art. And there's some little controversy in some of that, too, hasn't there been?
Well, most people who remember the Jewish Museum from the 60s, which I think is what you're referring to, remember an institution that was filled with avant-garde art. We really were the museum that first showed the minimalists, for example, and many other very contemporary artists. And then there was a switch over in the late 60s and early 70s back to what might be thought of as traditional Jewish exhibitions. By the late 70s, we were coming back to the middle. There was a change in directors and a vision that Jewish isn't just one thing. Jewish is contemporary art because there are so many contemporary artists who are expressing their identity as is every ethnic group, actually, at this point. So we were able to look at contemporary art through a new lens, but we also have one of the greatest collections of Judaica in the world. And I think that we still are in the vanguard in that our mode of exhibiting is to put things in a context and provide an historical context, a context that helps visitors not only be able to look at the art but understand it in the scheme of the Jewish history and Jewish culture. And we're one of the first museums to have done such work.
But the exhibit has a permanent collection, and so there are some exhibits which are permanent, and then there are some which change. The opening, the reopening in June, for example, had a group of new exhibits. Let's talk about those, some of which are ongoing, some of which may be over by the time people are seeing this. So let's go first about the changing exhibits.
There are two changing exhibits. The first is called Collecting for the 21st Century, and while that particular exhibition may leave, the objects stay in the collection because they are both recent acquisitions and promised gifts. And I think it fills the whole second floor of the exhibition, which are the rooms that are probably the most familiar to those who remember the Warburg Museum, because they are the classic mansion restored. But the exhibition is just filled with very important art from the first part of the 20th century, artists like Chagall, Pascan, Max Liebermann, Max Weber, Chaim Soutine, Elie Nodelman, and we've really expanded that part of our collection. Many of these are artists who people may remember from the Circle of Montparnasse, which was an exhibition we did a few years ago. And there's an enormous range of new contemporary Judaica. Artists like Alice Aycock, who created a game based on the dreidel, wonderful mechanical piece. Wallace Berman, a lot of wonderful both painting, sculpture, graphics, and ceremonial objects that I think may give people a whole new feeling or a new spin on what Jewish art is.
And let's talk now about the permanent exhibits. There are some things that are very impressive there.
The permanent. There's another temporary exhibition on the first floor, which is called From the Inside Out, 8 contemporary artists, and these are installation pieces by 8 internationally known artists who, while all of them actually are mainstream artists, not necessarily known for their Jewish work, they're all pursuing themes of identity and history that is very personal to them, and at the same time has some kind of universal context. So that's really a wonderful experience. The permanent exhibition is really the keystone of the Jewish Museum, and it was actually the impetus for the entire renovation project. It was inspired by and dedicated to Dorothy Rogers, the widow of Richard Rogers, who came to us over a decade ago and wanted there to be something in New York that recreated the experience she had at the Museum of the Diaspora in Israel. And we began with our collection, which is 27,000 objects, and tried to look at the story that we could tell about what is Jewish, not who, but what is Jewish, how did the Jews go from being Israelites to becoming Jews, and what has enabled the Jewish people to survive all of this time when many other ancient peoples have not. And we've used the collections to tell that story.
I have to admit that my visit wasn't long enough. I only had time to look at part of it, but it's certainly worth many, many repeat visits. I'm also very, very impressed with the George Siegel sculpture. Why don't we talk about that a little bit?
The George Siegel sculpture is called The Holocaust. It's actually the plaster mold for the actual sculpture, which is outdoors in San Francisco, I believe in Lincoln Park, outside, and it's a memorial to the Holocaust. It's one of our treasures. It's been in our collection for a number of years, and it's exhibited in the contemporary part of the permanent exhibition. And it has particular resonance. We will next spring be doing an exhibition called The Art of Memory, which really deals with how the Holocaust has been remembered, and certainly art and this particular piece are an integral part of that memory.
You're director of education. What does that entail? What does that mean?
It means that we get to interact and provide services, we hope, for most of the hundreds of thousands of visitors who come to the museum. My department is divided into a number of different sections or services. We provide programs for school children. Over 30,000 kids a year come to the museum, most of whom are not Jewish. They come from the public schools because, as you know, multicultural education is really one of the most important aspects of secular education today. And we feel that we have the resources to talk about and to look at Jewish culture in a way that very few other resources have. So it's a major contribution that we make. We also do programs for Jewish schools, for day schools. We do public programs, which for us are adult programs. Those are the concerts, lectures, films, symposia, anything that has to do with expanding upon the ideas that are both in exhibitions and in the collections of the museum. We supply we have a group of 47 docents who give tours to the adult groups that come. The children are all taught by a professional staff of educators. We do family programs on Sundays and weekends.
Talking about children and families, you have a wonderful children's room, an interactive children's room, which I think deserves some discussion and explanation.
Well, I'm very excited about that because it's the first time that we've really had a dedicated space in the museum for children to do exhibitions. The Jewish Museum is a wonderful museum, but for children it needs a lot of interpretation. And this was an opportunity for us to think about those ideas that children can explore further with their parents in the permanent exhibition, but begin on a scale that suits them. And so we chose the theme of the Sabbath, which is one of the core tenets of Judaism, and we provided a space for children to both understand the content and what the Sabbath means and where it comes from and how one celebrates it. And then we also created a space so that they could start to look at and make learn discriminating skills about ceremonial objects like the candlesticks that are lit, or the cup that holds the wine, or the spice box that we use at the end of the Sabbath.
It's not just looking at pictures on the wall because there are things to pull and things to hold,
buttons to push, things to put together, puzzle pieces to figure out the sequence of how the Sabbath is celebrated, but also an opportunity to really look at real objects from the collection, which we're very proud of having been able to exhibit, and have children then be able to go into the main exhibition with some sense of how you look at these objects.
Your audience, I would assume that you're primarily attracting Jewish people who come to the museum. Do you find that, you mentioned multicultural, do you find, is there any way to know whether people of other ethnicities are coming to the museum?
There are. We know, for example, that with the school programs, that a good 65 to 70% of the school children who come are not Jewish, which is why that program is so important for us. People come to the Jewish Museum for a variety of reasons. They come from out of town because they're curious, they've heard about it, they're interested in seeing it. They come because of some of the public programs we do that have much more universal appeal. We did a lecture last year of an internationally known German architect named Liss, who's involved in designing a museum in Berlin. And it brought in a whole audience of people who simply know who he is and were interested in architecture as it related to what we were talking about. So it depends on the program, it depends on the exhibition.
Have the number of people who have been coming to the museum increased since?
Significantly.
Why?
Significantly.
Why?
I think there's a greater interest in learning about other cultures. I think that the mix of not only our own permanent collection, which, as I said, is one of the three great collections in the world. The other two are in Israel and in Prague, Czechoslovakia. But that we're also showing contemporary art, and the museum is an open place, programs, audience, exhibitions, and we also have been doing for quite a long time these social history exhibitions, which are of tremendous interest. We did one a number of years ago on the Dreyfus Affair, which had tremendous impact. And a year and a half ago, we did one called Bridges and Boundaries, African Americans and American Jews, which is still traveling around the country now. These are the kind of exhibitions that raise contemporary questions and that appeal to a much broader spectrum of audience.
I noted I was in Manhattan on June 15th for Museum Mile, and I have to admit that I was unable to get into the museum. The line was much, much too long. It was one of the prime attractions. Perhaps that was because it had just opened that
It had
week.
opened 2 days before, so there was a lot of interest and a lot of press attention also.
Yes, of course, that of course is an important fact, I suppose, in anything that you
Sure.
do. Let's talk some more about coming to the museum. You do take groups through. What is the best way to visit the Jewish Museum? Is there, from your experience and from all the things that you've done, is there a good way to go? And I don't mean start at the fourth floor and work your way down.
That's the first thing I was going to say. So, well, it depends how you come. You know, we have an enormous attendance of groups that come to the museum, and of course the best way then is to call the education department and make an appointment, and we'll provide guides for you. But if you come as individuals, it really does pay to start at the fourth floor. When we designed this permanent exhibition, before it had a name, which is Culture and Continuity, the Jewish Journey, we called it the Core Exhibition because it was, for us, the core of our collections, but really the core of the Jewish experience. And we felt that any temporary exhibition that we did over the course of the years, one could always refer to either an historic period or some custom or ritual, but it really was the core of who we were all about. So we see it as probably one of the most important aspects, and it does make sense to start there, and hopefully that will provide a context for the exhibition, the changing exhibitions on the first and second floors.
And how about time? How much time should one give to the museum?
I think we calculated that if you read all the labels, we're a very text-based as well as object-based. The permanent exhibition is if you read all the labels, it might take 5 to 7 hours to get through the whole thing. So you can't get frustrated. You have to kind of pace yourself. But you ought to give yourself a couple of times. Besides a couple of hours, beside the exhibitions, there's a fabulous new gift store. In fact, there are two of them. There's a design shop in the brownstone next door, and we have a wonderful new cafe called Cafe Weissman, which is
So you can spend the day.
you can spend the day.
Yeah.
Spend the day at the Jewish Museum.
Someone once used the term museum feet, and that is when you stand too long in a museum. And I know personally, my experience is that I don't like to stay in a museum more than an hour and a half, because then it becomes a blob, and you're much better off going back because you see things that you haven't seen before.
Well, and we designed the museum, and particularly the permanent exhibition, to accomplish that. We felt it was the kind of thing, it's so layered and complex in meaning that you can just kind of walk through it, or you can stay and linger in specific parts, but it's meant to be revisited.
You mentioned docents. Are there tours even if you do not come in a group?
Yes.
How does that work?
There are 2 scheduled gallery talks daily. One is at 12 o'clock, one will be at 2 o'clock. There will be docents stationed throughout the museum. They're wearing buttons that say "Ask Me," so you have questions, you can go up and ask. And another feature at the end of the permanent exhibition is a resource room that was created, which will contain both print and media material. We have at the Jewish Museum a curatorial department called the National Jewish Archive of Broadcasting, which is a repository for television and radio material. And this room will be programmed, so if you've gone through and you still have questions or you want to talk to someone, 2 of the docents will be in there to help you find resource material, catalogs, other reference books, and a menu of tapes that you can access, which will enable you to get more information about what you've seen.
Isn't there also something where interactive computers that people can use?
There's an interactive computer that's part of the permanent exhibition. It's about the Talmud, which is a compendium of Jewish laws, which has governed Jewish life for 2 millennia. And it's a very important document, and the questions that it asks and that the interactive computer poses are questions the rabbis argued about 2,000 years ago, and there's still questions that are relevant to us today.
How does that work exactly?
Well, you get a choice. There's a menu. You can choose one of the 3 questions, which are, what do you do when a beggar approaches you on the street? When does life begin? And how do you apportion your time so you can balance in your life, so that you can balance work and study and friends and family? And you get to press the screen and access the programs and look at the text and listen to scholars argue, and it's quite a wonderful program.
So it's a demonstration program of answering questions. Is that specifically how
it's meant to give you? It's meant to accomplish a few things. One is to show the flexibility and the of Talmudic wisdom, that it was formed so long ago, but it still has relevance to our lives today. It's also meant to help you access all of this information.
Well, talking about relevance, we want to make sure that we give a telephone number that people can call to get more information about that Jewish museum. Now, there is a number where there's a recorded message which gives a lot of information. Could you tell us what that number is now?
It's 212-423-3230.
Would you repeat that?
212-423-3230.
And we'll put that on the screen in the closing credits, so in case anybody missed it, they can get that. Now, if people are interested in further information, there is a main number that they can call as well, right?
Yes, there's the main museum number is 212-423-3200.
Okay, so just, but the recorded message gives a lot of information. I plan to go back again and again and again. Walk me through the exhibit of your choice and tell me what I'm going to see.
Well, the exhibit of my choice really is the permanent exhibition, because there are so many objects in that collection that I've known for a long time that have been part of Jewish history, part of the history of the museum, and they're so expressive of Jewish life. There's a crown, a Torah crown, on the 3rd floor that's made out of copper, and it's called the Bolzano crown. It came on a pedestal when it came to the Jewish Museum, and it came from the collection of the Jewish community of Danzig, which had sent in the summer of 1939 all of the ceremonial objects that belonged to the synagogue and to some individuals to New York, to the Jewish Theological Seminary, in preparation for they weren't quite sure what. The community was destroyed, and so the collection is now part of the Jewish Museum. The crown was on a pedestal with a sign on it, and the text read, "This crown was made in Bolzano, Italy. It turned up in a pogrom in Russia and became part of a collection of a man named Gilchinsky, who was a grain merchant in Danzig. And now it's at the Jewish Museum." And I never fail to look at it without thinking that this crown represents so much of Jewish history.
And I never fail to look at the clock and find that we've run out of time, and I thank you very much for joining us. My guest today has been Judith Siegel, who is the Director of Education at the Jewish Museum. It's an experience for Jews and for non-Jews alike. Go there. I'm Norman Liss. The name of the program is The Way to Go. Join me each week at this time, and until next week, enjoy yourself.